Hello, this is Imani Lateef, creator of Peep Game Comix. You're watching Black Comics Universe, streaming exclusively here on The Experience. Please help us out by hitting share and giving us a like and follow. Then make sure to tune in for our original programming 7 days a week. Black Comics Universe streams every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern on all DSPs. That's Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. Today's guests, we have illustrator and storyteller Junie Ba, broadcasting from the South. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Fantastic. I like discussions like this.
Oh yeah, this will be good. Most of you might know Junie from the recent work you just did for DC's Truth and Justice. I think it's probably the most recent work. Also with your graphic novel that you put out through it's slipping my mind. Can you tell us about your graphic novel that you put out?
Yeah. Wait, do I have a copy somewhere? Yeah. So it's called Jelia. I don't know if you can see it very well. Yeah.
And we might have some artwork we could pull up too.
It's published by TKO, and it's
TKO. Okay.
On the cover, we describe it as a West African fantasy epic. So it's basically me using the folklore of the place where I grew up, which is Senegal and surrounding countries, and making a fantasy adventure out of it. The basic premise being that the wizard who used to rule the world destroyed it, and a king and his dearly royal storyteller and counselor are trying to travel to him in his tower to basically ask him why he did it, and trying to rebuild the world that he destroyed. And the more they discover about the world as they travel, the more they start to realize that maybe the system that they were living in wasn't as perfect as they had been told it was.
Mm-hmm. Now, out of curiosity, now I've been following you for a while, for a couple of years, and when I saw this book, it immediately reminded me, and I'm sure it's loosely based on Kenan and Abeni, the other webcomic that you put out.
Yeah, basically I had started working on Jelia before I started working on Kenan and Abeni with Kenan, the co-creator of it. And basically when he approached me, he had this idea of something that he wanted to do, and it was very much in line with what I was doing. So I basically told him, I'm going to bring in the design that I've been working on. We're going to test them in this comic and see how it goes. And he eventually dropped out of it. I made 2 more issues alone, and then figured I had already been working on my own stuff. Like, why am I still working on this? And so, like, this is why it shares some designs and everything, is because all that stuff had been made prior, and I brought it into Kenan and Abeni, and figured it works. Let's try and bring it back into the main thing I was working on before.
Okay. Really enjoy your style of storytelling. I'm a huge fan of bringing in our cultural heritage into comic book storytelling. Yeah, thanks. It doesn't happen as often as I would like, but I really enjoyed your storytelling and your storytelling style. And I was wondering, do you the way you bring in those stories, those folk tales into your story, um, do you approach it from an academic standpoint, or are you approaching it from this is more traditional, like these stories were passed down to you from a familial approach?
I think calling it academic would be pompous, but it's a mix. Actually, it's a big mix of. The reason why I had the idea in the first place is because I grew up there, and you get someone tells you a story, or you read a book that's just in the house, and the family has it, and it's sort of part of your life the same way that watching TV is. So when you turn on TV, you get all the American and Japanese and French stuff. That's most of the output that I had on TV when I was a kid, and it's on the same level as going on your grandfather's shelf, picking out a book that's on your own folklore and reading stories like that. So when I started doing research for this, the first thing I did was I asked my grandfather for a book of African folk tales, just to get me going. So he gave me one. My dad gave me one of his, which was a book that I had been reading since I was a kid. So I started with those two, and then the rest is who are names of writers, African writers that I had known about since I was a child, but never really delved into what they were doing. Then you also have just going on the internet and searching for what people consider good references. There's walking into a library, and then you have a random book that's there, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to check it out. Like it's a mix of family influences and pure chance, and actual like research of what is considered a faithful, appropriate matter to use, I guess.
Okay. What would you call because you're not just a storyteller, you're also an illustrator. And how would you describe your style? Because I've listened to a couple of interviews, and you can tell like you highly influenced by, Mike Mignola, which I'm a huge fan of. How would you describe your style of drawing?
I usually say it's because like the big thing is my mom is I don't even know how to describe it. Like she's one of those people from the Caribbean who are very pale until you put them in the sun, and then they start getting darker and darker. And my dad is like full West African. So I am genetically speaking mixed, but I was always more into the fact that culturally speaking, I am mixed. So, like I grew up with the influences of both France and Senegal as the main ones. But like I said, like the books you read, the TV you watch, the movies you go see in the theater, all of that stuff is made in America and in Japan for most of my interest. So like the art is a result of all of that. It has influences that come from like Senegal, France, Belgium, Japan, America, Italy. Like it's a purposefully made to be sort of a streamlined version of all the things I like in influences from different countries and different creators. So I guess that's how I would summarize it.
How I've been trying to figure out how you managed to find your way in front of DC editors and major in comic book Shangri-La right now. You're in France. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like if like aesthetically, the comics could not be more different than like European comics and Western comics, but like you're doing a ton of I keep seeing your artwork in a lot of variant covers. You're starting to do actual, modern superhero comics. Not on top of what you're doing with TKO, which definitely I can definitely see that's their attempt to sort of get their foot into Angolan with a book like yours. But it's like, so how is it that you have all these, you have your foot in like so many different, I don't know how to put it, like genres of comics. How did you manage to do that? Or was that intentional?
Sort of, but not really. The short answer is a lot of hustle. Like I have done my own little like diagnosis of how things have been going since I graduated like 4 years ago.
Okay.
And basically I started off like the day of my graduation. How can I summarize this? Basically, the last year of art school that I was on, I was already doing comics inspired by West African folklore. Okay. Which was not the only thing I wanted to do. It just happened to be the subject that I wanted to do for that particular thing. And I had been told by the teachers to not put too much faith in it, because you would not find an audience or a publisher willing to put money into it. And wow. So basically what I did was that once I graduated, I went on the internet and I figured I wanted to do it for myself still. So I found a Facebook group, as many Facebook groups related to comics as I could, and I specifically zeroed in as well on African-related comics. So I joined the group Kugali, which was just a Facebook page and a podcast at the time. Today they're like publisher doing video games and comics and animation. They have a deal with they're making a series with Disney now. Like that's how far we've all come. Right. So like we started with a podcast and a Facebook page, and we made one volume together where we had all our stories with a bunch of other African creators. It got attention, and so from there I started seeing my work and the work of other members of the group being published in or Italy and other places. And that's also how publishers get an interest in you. They start seeing you on those platforms, and they think it has potential. Which is also how I got the TK deal, because I contacted them. They said, we don't usually accept submissions, but in your case, we want to see what you have to offer, because we've been following your work for a while. And that's also because of Gali. And just posting my the Kain and Abini stuff and making short stories for myself, posting them on the internet, the whole thing has been very effective, because very quickly I saw that the American side of comics was much more responsive to it than the French one. Okay. And so it still took like a good 2-3 years before I was finally able to turn this into recurring work. Right. But yeah, it's basically that, the hustle and making stuff for yourself and posting it on the internet and finding like-minded people who have limited but effective enough means that puts you on the map, basically. And then you just work until you get to where you want to be. And you send submissions, the worst they can say is no. And it's gonna attract attention to the point where other people are gonna start sending you messages.
No, I like that. That formula is very effective. Actually, starting with art school, because ironically, a lot of new people coming into, especially indie comics, or what we call indie comics, they don't have necessarily an art school foundation or academic foundation. They're coming with kind of cold. It's like, well, they're a fan of comics. They've been a fan of comics. They've had this story for a long time. Then it gets into a Facebook group like the one you mentioned, and they're sort of but it's sort of okay, how do I make comics? So it's sort of there is something to the idea of coming into the group somewhat prepared. You know what I mean? With some type of foundation in the arts, in writing, or however,
and plus, loads of artists who are doing very well for themselves have not necessarily gone to art school. And even my evolution in it, like one of the things that my uncle told me before I left Senegal to come to France was the school is only going to give you like 30% of the work you're supposed to do. The 70% that's left, that's the work that you have to do for yourself on your own time. You have to do your own research, your own observing other creators, going to museums, developing your own discipline, basically. Which is why, like, art school was more of a guidance tool for me. There's a lot of stuff there that I'm not using anymore and never will use again. But the most effective thing for me was having teachers that I could go to when I was working on my 70% of work on myself. I could then go to those teachers and show them what the result of it, and they would tell me this is working, this is not, which you can still find on the internet. So I went to art school because the system was like it's the pressure of like and the convenience of having teachers who have experience in it that you can trust. But that's not a necessary thing at all. You can always do this on yourself, by yourself on the internet. Like it's probably even better because you don't have to actually spend any money.
Right. So I've seen you in different styles, like, you know, doing the stuff for DC, but also at the same time doing your independent stuff. What style of writing or what style of storytelling do you prefer?
I would say there's perks in every aspect. The working on the whole DC stuff so far, because that's the one main publisher I've worked with regularly. There is a fun aspect to it because you're working on characters that you know. So it's sort of the fanboy aspect of it.
Right.
But it's not necessarily as creatively fulfilling because of all the guidelines around it and the machine, I guess, behind.
Right.
I've worked on people's scripts for like indie stuff, which is very good for me because very often it's on stories that I would not come up with myself, and it's always fun to like. I like being able to hop on the script made by someone else, which is about a subject matter that I would not even be interested in, but it sort of forces me out of my comfort zone, which is really always fun, and it's kind of like going on a trip in a country you've never seen before. It's kind of nice, but the thing I prefer is always writing for myself. So it does tend to revolve around certain subjects a lot. The next things I'm working on for like future books, I can already see some recurring themes or types of stories or character archetypes. But it is the most fulfilling aspect because I have complete control over it. I create an entire universe and I can play with it anywhere I want. So yeah, I would say the ladder would be completely one indie stuff on someone else's script, and then the more big two superhero stuff.
Right.
Like the ladder would be that.
You know, I follow you on Twitter too, and I noticed that you're extremely critical on a lot of different things, and I've been noticing a few questions you've been asking. What do you think? What has been sort of like when I think about pop culture, like Western pop culture? What's been the most frustrating thing that you've had to sort of like not just deal with as a fan, but also deal with as, you know, as an illustrator, as a storyteller?
I'm gonna sound like a mini Scorsese, but my biggest issue, I guess, is the consumerism of it, because it generally tends to strip away what it strips. It tends to strip away the meaning of things.
Right.
Like the themes in it, the emotional impact or whatever else, because it turns things into a product, and gradually the soul of whatever was there at first starts to disappear for some reason.
Right.
And like especially when it's like the whole concept of franchise has started to be really annoying to me, because you can't just create something. You have like now you have a pipeline of making a thing, which in the best of cases would be the creation of one or multiple people who have really poured their soul into it and have like a real message that they want to convey, and then it gets a sequel, it gets spin-offs, it gets
Right.
video game adaptations and
Right.
movies, and all of that stuff gets gradually more and more stripped of any soul to be as wide market as possible. And then you start losing the thing that you had in the beginning. Like it doesn't have any more meaning anymore. It's more of a something to sell. And like yesterday, I saw a tweet about how the creators of South Park just signed a deal for like 14 movies, and I just why? Like this
Right.
is a good example, I feel, because it's not even out, but I already feel like you can't tell me that you have so much heart and soul and things to say to put in 14 movies, and it's not just a business deal at this point. So like South Park it's kind of a zombie version of itself, because kind of like the whole zombie Simpson thing. Like it's a shadow version of itself that has lost the soul that it had. So that's things I used to be very much into the Marvel movies when they started because of all the potential of it. And as the years went by, it gradually stayed the same. It gradually stayed entertaining, but never fulfilling. Never like I would never come out of a movie being like it actually had a story and it completed it and it was a full story that made me feel or think or whatever. But it was just Scorsese said it's roller coaster. I find the description kind of apt, and that's not even a negative thing. It is a roller coaster, and it's a very good one. It just doesn't give me the meat that I usually want from my stories. It doesn't feel like it was made by someone who had something to say. It felt like it was made by a committee that wanted to sell you a product. So, like, I understand why some people like that aspect of it. I just don't. I don't know. I've watched and read so much of stuff now that I feel empty afterwards. So I'm critical of it because I figure we could be doing better, especially with all the mass of stuff being produced. Like so much money and energy could be put into better things, but the business aspect of it is it's a behemoth that's eating money for a result that's not necessarily always the best in terms of, I don't know, human message from one to another. So yeah, I don't know if that made much sense.
It runs. No, I think that runs opposite to traditional storytelling. That which is the foundation of your work. So it's like the folk tales and the lore that's passed down from family to family. It's like that runs opposite to that. It's not a commercial story.
Yeah.
It's almost like how Snow White used to be, a bedtime story, but now it is a franchise. Or Cinderella
exactly.
is
It sells
Cinderella is like
it's like the merchandise doesn't have the weight of the story that created it. Like it's a token of your appreciation for something, but it's not the thing itself. And at some point you have purchased so many tokens of your appreciation of a thing that you don't have the thing anymore. You've had so many sequels and spin-offs of the first Alien movie that at this point you're not even close to what the Alien movie was. Which, yeah, I just sort of get a bit empty afterwards. So I try to focus my energy on things that I feel have more soul to them, and especially if they can be original stuff.
Right.
in them anymore. So I'm much
Right.
more excited for Green Knight, which is like the movie I'm championing the most. I still haven't seen
Yeah.
it,
Yeah, I
and
was
I'm excited for it because like it is technically based on something, but like it's based on a text from like the medieval ages. So, like
right.
there's a it's okay. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, but it feels like someone wanted to tell a story. It has an aesthetic that is interesting. I don't know. There's a vibe
Hmm.
to it that I'm just like, yes.
Right. No, it's a very interesting story because it's one of the very first recorded folk tales.
Mm,
There's a lot of history behind this story and it's a singular story. It's not like it's not a series. It's not like
yeah,
Harry Potter or something like that. It's like a singular story, right? And
yeah.
the characters are familiar, but the story in and of itself it's like a one and done. So it's sort of like, and it has all these moral dilemmas in the story.
Mm,
So I'm actually, yeah, I'm also very excited about that movie too because I like the fact I like the way they cast the movie. I think the lead role, I can't think of his name, but I think he's actually perfect for the role.
yeah.
It felt familiar. He was very familiar with the role, even with just the clips that I've seen. So I think it's gonna be, it's probably underrated, under the radar type of film. But yeah, I'm with you. I'm a fan of that type of storytelling.
Which I would be very happy if it remains under the radar because I don't want things to develop into franchises.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the scary thing. It's like it's almost be too good. You want it to just be. It's almost like um Adam Sandler, that Spanglish movie that he came out with, where he was a chef and he talked about he doesn't want 5 stars. He wants 4.5 or 4.25 stars because
Yeah.
it's just good enough to be impressive, but not so good. It's sort of like pompous, like you were saying. It's like it's
Mm,
just right.
yeah.
But can you talk a little bit about your how you got into comics just as a fan? Because I don't think people understand that sort of like I think definitely here in the States, I think we take for granted people's access and people's understanding of reading comics altogether. It's sort of
Mm,
like there's such a huge part of the industry that are, culturally trained or culturally used to, you know, I used to go to comics. I've always bought these comics my whole life. I've always had access to this work. Um, I know here it's like I used to live down the street from a comic book shop, but even here in the United States, it's sort of like there is still an issue of access because I was fortunate enough to live down the street from a comic book shop, which typically in the suburbs, but the vast majority of my community don't have that luxury. They don't have the luxury of taking a bus out to the middle of nowhere just to go read comics.
mm,
So, but I also see that same issue of access in places like countries on the African continent, like Nigeria, Senegal, Tanzania, South Africa. But I'm also noticing how innovative a lot of independent publishers from the African continent are sort of answering that dilemma. Like especially I see a lot of digital comics come out of countries on the African continent, and I'm very impressed by the amount of work and innovation they put in to solve that problem for
yeah.
their communities. And that's sort of similar to what I've been trying to do here. And I wanted to see if you could speak to like that whole idea of comics, in the African on the African continent.
Yeah. Um, so in a sense, I was still lucky because I was living in the capital of Senegal, which still had a library that was I'm going to say effective enough.
Mm,
Like it was big enough to have quite a selection of books of all kinds. It just
mm,
didn't have that many. that much diversity in terms of subject matter, in terms of comics, because you had to have some space for everything, and so comics kind of got the short hand of the stick, and they would usually have the big French names of the time, and like one spinning rack of manga, which was my heaven when I was a teenager. So I started reading comics like as I was learning to read. Like I've always read comics, and most of the time they would be French or Belgian comics aimed at children that I would get from like family members or whenever we would go to France, which is another aspect of me being lucky. I was in a family that, because we had family members in France, we would go almost every summer. And that would allow me to like see what was in the shops there, which was like 10 times what was in Senegal. And so from childhood I would read comics. The thing was that because of the limited selection in Senegal, you would sort of have to pick and choose what you would want to read. And especially when you're a child and you have like a limited budget, because the books are expensive, especially in an African country. Like it's a luxury basically to have access to those stuff. So you would buy them rarely, and I would like need to ask the parents to get those books, and I would usually need to deserve them, like having a good grade or you know, that type of stuff, or waiting for the holidays and stuff like that. So the biggest challenge was access, and the best solution I had when I was a teenager was the internet, which is the reason why I was reading so much manga when I was a teenager. I had already but then I discovered manga through like a schoolmate, and I think part of the reason why I gravitated towards them so much was, one, they were way more interesting. Like they were like, I don't like the term, but they were exotic for me, because all the Japanese culture, folklore, aesthetic, and everything like that looked cool and new and different. But also it was made by those people, so they would always do it in a way where it never felt like you were supposed to pay attention to it. It was just it's a cool setting you don't know, but it's telling a very human story. And the second thing was that you would go on the internet and there would be huge communities of people sharing scans, talking about whatever happened in the last chapter that came out. Every week we would all, like, the pipeline for every manga reader in my middle and high school when I was a kid was Naruto came out. We would all go back home after school to read it on our computers, and then come back to school the following day and talk about what we just read. Like it was like Game of Thrones, you know?
Yeah.
So because it was available not very legally on the internet, but then we would all buy the volumes, and we would all have the volumes on our shelves at home. And I eventually realized that I was not buying much French stuff because manga had taken so much of my interest, and because of the easy access.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah.
Being that you were so influenced by manga, especially at a young age, and most kids, I teach a lot of comic book workshops and classes with kids, and like they're all influenced heavily by manga. My son, he's 12, he draws his own mangas. You know, that seems like the access point, the most typical access point. What is it that made? But at the same time, your artwork now is so, at least to me, is so aesthetically, for lack of a better phrase for myself, like African. Like, what was it about your particular style that made you intentionally choose the style that you draw compared to all these other influences out there? Because it's like you had you're very good as far as as far as being skilled artists. So you could have chosen, I would imagine you would be able to choose any style you wanted to. What is it about the style that you chose to tell your stories, compared to, and I think the fact that you chose this style has definitely helped you make a name for yourself compared to you could have drawn a manga style. You could have drawn a traditional, because I see a lot of, African artists that do draw in a traditional, either a manga style or a traditional Western comic book style. But your work, whenever I see your work, it's sort of like it's almost like you're intentionally bringing it down to the more traditional African style of storytelling. It's like, what was the intention?
So when I was a teenager, I used to draw very much manga, very influenced by it, and part of it was the lack of like practice, because you get better over time. But I very quickly realized that I did not wasn't good. I wasn't good at the typical manga style. Like I would play, but it always looked like the lines would be too thick, too blocky, and it never had like the flow that I would enjoy so much in some of the books that I read. I also read some, like France had a wave of like French creators drawing in a manga style, very stereotypically manga, and the quality would vary a lot. And generally speaking, there would be this vibe of like, it looked manga, but you could still tell it was made by a French person. And I figured I don't want to be like a sort of two Lego pieces that's not supposed to go together. I don't want my art to look like that. So I think the big shot for me was discovering Mignola when I was like 17 or 18.
Discovering
Mignola.
Oh, Mignola. Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
Like, so basically, I discovered Hellboy, and I looked at the art style, and I was like, you can draw like that, because so far I had only seen manga, which has a variety of different styles. Like, it varied between the very cartoony or the very realistic, and I liked the cartoony, but it didn't fulfill everything that I wanted, and the very realistic just wasn't appealing to me, and I have drawn realistically before for like training and stuff, but I don't enjoy it. And I would not make a book out of it. It was sort of my discovery that you could, not just that you could draw like, but also that you could have a very different style. You could have a very like non-realistic, very weird style that would be sort of yours. So I had a phase where I drew very much like him, and then it started stripping away and being mixed with other influences. That's where I brought in the cartoony aspect of the French comics for kids that I enjoy. And so I would say my art now is sort of like at the meeting point between the very cartoony stuff from Belgium and France, Mignola's style of very blocky shapes, and the more action-oriented shonen manga stuff. And my art is in the middle of all of those. And the African aspect of it came because I grew up with it, and I realized when I was drawing characters, when I was starting to make the universe for Gilia, because the influences were very specifically West African, I started to realize that it sort of came naturally to me. I knew what shapes to use, I knew how to make them work together, and that was mostly because I grew up with it. Right. And it just so happens, I guess, that and the way Mignola draws, they mesh really well with the way traditional African art looks. Like I think it's because it's all about stripping things down to essential shapes.
Yes.
So because everything is stripped down to essential shapes, if you want to use influences from a cartoony French comic, a panel from Hellboy, or an African statue, they all strip down so much that you can put them together and create something new out of that. So I think that's how my art came up. Like it was half on purpose because I knew that I would need to have something that people would look at and would like strike them to attract attention, because the market is what it is. But there was also the fact that when I'm scrolling like down Instagram, I'm looking at different pieces of art, and every time I look at one that like strikes me a lot, I'm like, I want to draw like this person. And I look at another piece and I'm like, I want to draw like this person, and the two pieces don't look anything like each other. And the reason why I want to draw like both those guys is because both of them have found their thing.
Right.
So I
Right. Right.
figured I
Right.
just need to find mine and be
Mm-hmm.
satisfied with it. And
You
it's still in
know.
process. Like I'm still
Mm-hmm.
evolving and changing things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was. It was very interesting for me because I was so used to the seeing your style with your original work.
Mm.
Reading Cayenne and Albany, and then but seeing you do like Robin, it was sort of like, but bringing your aesthetic to it,
Yeah.
and I really enjoyed your take on it, right? And
Nice.
speaking
Thanks.
of takes, like for instance, and like for instance, even when I saw you did some fan art of, when Black Panther was hot, and of course you did your version of
Mm.
Black Panther, but it was it felt so authentic, um, your version compared to what most people typically do,
Yeah.
and I really appreciate that style, and I've been wanting to ask, um, you know, um, Nnedi Okorafor is probably like the closest thing to an African writer that has written a story about Black Panther. She wrote Shuri, right? But
Hmm.
she's Nigerian American as well. I don't think to date an African writer has written anything for that particular character, right? Could you see
Mm.
yourself writing that story, or like, what do you see like so many of the way they have approached his story? There's been a ton of very good writers that approach that story, but not everyone, right? Like for
Mm.
instance, like Christopher Priest is probably like the pinnacle of the Black Panther authors, but even he intentionally took him from the African continent. He really wanted to make Black Panther Batman. So like he put him
Yeah.
in New York City for the most parts, and he made Wakanda like this. He almost actually made it sort of like this backwater place, even though all the technological advancements, he
Mm.
really put it on the back burner. So then when you get to even Reggie Hudlin, or even the recent run with Ta-Nehisi Coates, it's sort of like it's kind of utopia, but not really. Like they're bringing all these other. He brought in like a ton of these political issues. It's sort of like, I don't know if that necessarily really told the story or helped to tell the story.
Yeah.
Has any of
Um,
those depictions sort of like what did they miss? Like what's missing from those storylines?
See, for me, it's not so much a matter of missing things because Black Panther is not an African creation and was never meant to be. Because
Right.
Black Panther was created by two Jewish guys who were like, we want to do something for the African Americans of our country, whose struggles and issues, especially in the 60s, were not the issues and struggles of Africa. So Black Panther is not made by or for Africans at all. He fulfills a purpose that has nothing to do with Africa, and everything to do with Black people of America. And so I would say that so far he's fulfilled his purpose pretty well. Now, if I was to like try and write the guy with a more African interest, more towards Africa, him more of an, it's like so far the even the black creators who worked on him, you can always tell where there's something that just doesn't work when it comes to like the African aspect of the character or the country. It just doesn't. It feels like an American making an African thing. So I never had a problem with it. I never really wondered how I would do it to like change the character to make him more African, because he doesn't, like I said, that's not really his purpose, and I don't want to take him too far away from it. I think it would be fun to like be able to work on him and give him more of an African spin. I'm not exactly sure what the story would be or what it would talk about. I sort of like the way the movie handled it. In terms of the movie was about the relationship between Black Americans and Africans, and I like that I like that it went there. I wish it had developed it more, but it's actually one of the more developed Marvel movies. Uh, but I liked that it went there, and I liked what it had to say about it for the most part. So I don't know, like my version of Black Panther would be, it would probably be something along those lines of like my view of Black Americans as an African, I guess. That would probably be the starting point for me of like what would I want to do with Black Panther? Like what even in the meta way of like how is Black Panther seen by the Black Americans of his world? Or something like that. I don't know. Like you've thrown me into like into a spiral of I don't know. Like there's potential. There's definitely potential. Not that he's not at the top of my list. My favorite Marvel character is Thor. So if I had to like work on the Marvel book, I would want to try with Thor first. And I think Black Panther would be the second or third. It would be either him or Miles Morales. So,
You know, it's interesting. I've always thought Wakanda was more like Asgard anyway. I like the mythology in Thor compared to. They don't put much mythology or folklore in Black Panther, which I think is odd. It's like
which is what I would probably remember, to be honest, because I like that aspect so much. I think the reason why I like Thor, he fights all kinds of monsters.
Yes,
it has an epic aspect to it, like enormous world-traveling thing. Like, what would you do with Black Panther if you delved more into let's throw him in the savannah and fight some African creatures? Like, that could be fun.
If they made Wakanda more of a fantasy Asgardian type of place, that it was connected to all these different, connected more to the spiritual side of
which is already there.
Of their world. It's like there's all those aspects are there. I think you could definitely tell a more fulfilling story, like we've been talking about, compared to it does feel like the writers that have been writing for Black Panther specifically, they're writing for the franchise. They're writing for the machine as opposed to writing a compelling African what you would hope to be a traditional African story. But since they're writing for the American culture, they're writing this commercial story.
Yeah, there's also another aspect that you just made me think about. Black Panther was made with a very strong push on the technological aspect of things for many good reasons at the time, because like the whole goal was basically saying Black people are not savages and they are capable of great technology as well. So that was the reason in the 60s. Now though, I don't know, the world has changed, and I would imagine that making a story that's more focused on the spiritual aspect of things would be probably more beneficial for society, I guess, than something that's focused on technology. Because basically, we don't need a Black Elon Musk in our comics. We don't need the Black Jeff Bezos or like we don't need a guy who has technology. We probably need more of a guy who's more in tune with the planet that's being destroyed. Like that kind of story would be interesting, I think. A sort of push, like, what if the king was like, yeah, we've been relying on vibranium and technology for so long, but maybe there's something else we could be doing. Like, I don't know.
No, like the more I think about it, it was definitely the original story or the idea of Black Panther was definitely a very capitalist state of mind. Right? They're sitting on the idea of vibranium being like this rare mineral and all this kind of stuff. Like, so the whole foundation of this world is based on this commercial product, right? So everything comes from out of that, as opposed to, but it's sort of like, and I think Coates was trying to tackle some of the ideas of, okay, if it's a technology advance, it doesn't feel like it's politically advanced. He was trying to introduce all these different political aspects. I'm not sure how well he accomplished that, but I can definitely see that was his intent, you know?
Yeah.
But we got about 10 more minutes. Like, what else have you been working on, like, on that idea? And I would love to see you on Thor, by the way. I think that would be because it's like, because your style, like, because I like not so much, I guess you could call them monsters, but like your animal characters that you bring into your original storylines. I definitely, you're right. They will definitely find a home in a storyline like Thor or even Hellboy. I can see you on Hellboy. That would be off the hook too. Yeah. But is there anything that you can share that you're working on right now?
Not yet. I've been asked, like, keep the lid on it and refrain from talking about it. But I guess what I can say is I'm working on like an anthology type of series, because I've been doing short stories called Monkey Meat for years now. And I'm sort of like remaking it, and that's sort of what's keeping my time until I get signed on my next book or whatever. So that's what's keeping me busy now. And then for the rest, we'll see. The most of the stuff that I'm doing these days is covers and short skits on DC characters.
Oh, okay.
Which I like doing. It's really fun. So yeah. So for now, that's what it is. I think news are gonna. I think until then, I have been sworn to secrecy on anything I'm doing.
All right. And where can they can get your books on the TKO website for sure?
Yeah.
Can you help me out with the pronunciation of that name?
The Gilia?
The Gilia?
Gilia.
Okay. Gilia.
Yeah.
Okay. Gilia. Okay. Yes, sir. No, but I'm very anxious to actually get that book. And I'm constantly finding your variant covers. You got some Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle variant covers you've done?
Yeah.
I think you've done some variants. I got the Dark Blood variants.
Oh yes, I was really happy with that one.
What was the idea behind this? Because I was like, I know it's tied into the story, but it's definitely, this is like Junie Bond's interpretation of a white nuclear family there.
The base concept of the book was, for the first issue, it was about this black guy struggling in a small town in the US that's entirely white except for him and his family. So like I was trying to make something that would sort of hint at the whole the entire system exists because you're working not necessarily in the shadows, but you're doing the menial jobs for it to work, while the rest of the population is bathing in the ease and glory, I guess. And so yeah, I just had this idea of like a very cliche 50s type poster of a very white, perfect looking family on a giant billboard, and right on the bottom right of it, you just have a black guy who's the one putting on the poster. And I just thought the idea was conveyed really effectively by this. Like he's the one doing the work, but they are literally taking up all the space.
Right. Yeah, and I think that theme has played out in a lot of different areas, and especially for creatives,
Yeah.
Where we do a lot of the work, but we don't necessarily gain a lot of the benefits. But that's sort of the nature of the beast there in that regard. And then they can find you on, definitely everybody should follow you on Twitter, because if you're one of the most entertaining folks I follow on Twitter for sure. Junie Bar at Junie. Yeah. No. Because I've been thinking a lot about the last question you asked as far as like kind of like the sexualization of girls in pop culture.
Yeah, of teenagers, yes.
Yeah, and you know what's really ironic is that what I don't think people have been talking a lot about the popularity of manga, but I don't think they discuss how much manga sexualizes girls too. So like I think that's a huge part of the success that most people don't want to, really, touch on.
Yeah.
But so there's a lot of, we're not just talking about pop culture, we're talking about on a larger scale this idea of it's an extremely hard subject that we could take up a whole another hour on for sure. But it's but yeah, there's a ton of questions that you asked that stick with me on Twitter for sure.
Nice.
And and so I just want to remind everybody that you can find details about this interview. This will be you can go visit blackcomicsuniverse.com. You can follow me on social media at Black Comics Universe on Instagram, and I'm thinking about going on Facebook. I was trying to get away from Facebook, but I think I'm gonna have to start a Black Comics Universe page on Facebook too. But stay tuned for that. But yeah, check me out on blackcomicsuniverse.com. We have we have t-shirts now that we're selling. And for my friend Junie Ba, for Kyle producing in the backdrop, myself, Imani Lateef, creator of Peep Game Comix. I like and that's a wrap.